Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Sharmit podcast. Today, I'm honored to introduce Florian Rappl, a one of the well-known Microsoft MVP and renowned software architect, joining us from Germany. Florian is a pioneer in micro frontend and brilliant mind behind the Piral, the open source framework that helps to build modern web applications. With deep expertise spanning distributed system, IoT integration, and cutting edge front end architectures, he is shaping the future of web development. So, today in this episode, we are going to talk about Florian's professional journey and his advocacy activities. But before we start, I would like to thank Florian for joining us today in this episode. And now I request you to please initiate the discussion by telling us something about yourself.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here. Hi, everyone. My name is Florian Rappl. You just can call me Flo, like workflow, but more like fun flow. I'm a solution architect from the beautiful city of Munich here in Germany. I've been working at the same company called Smartpure. We're a smaller company for the last 6 years. Before that, I was working for other mid-sized to larger companies in the German-speaking area. And I'm a Microsoft MVP since I think now 2012. So quite some time already. Every year I'm happy when I'm let's say prolonged for another year. So it's an honor so far, and yeah, happy to be on the show.
Okay. All right. So thank you for the introduction, Flo. And now we will start from the very beginning. So let's start with your journey itself. So how did you get into the software development and like what were those things that led you to the focus on web platforms especially?
Yeah, so I think that all started already beginning of the 1990s. Like every kid, I just wanted to play games, and one of my friends had pretty much all the consoles. So, for instance, a new Super Nintendo. He had it, and I also wanted to have this new machine, but my parents were strictly against having a console, and so they bought me the next best thing, which was an Amiga 500 back then, and that for me, I mean, I first was not really sure what to do with this kind of a device.
Mm-hmm.
But then it turned out that besides, of course, also having very cool games, so Lemmings, for instance, and a lot of, airplane games and all that stuff. Silent Service, great uh, game as well for if you like submarines. Anyway, so it also had a nice operating system, Amiga DOS, and on that there was already pre-installed Amiga Basic, and you could already do a little bit of programming there. It came with a little bit of a tutorial, and that for me was already getting into that. So later on in the mid of the 90s, suddenly everyone was talking about the internet and the web. So that became it was still more or less underground back then, but it already became apparent that this might be the wave of the future. And so I just looked at the source code of these pages and I thought, well, that doesn't look so intimidating, just the HTML. But then, of course, the next question came up, how to make that, let's say, more dynamic
Yeah.
on the server side back then, of course. And the answer for me was Perl. So I got into scripting with Perl, and that was quite a journey. And from that, just the next step followed, right? So then I got into C, I got into C sharp then in the beginning of the 2000s. And then, of course, at some point in time, after writing, of course, some client applications, you ended up at ASP.NET, and which was brand new back then. And yeah, it just felt natural that the web platform had me because there all the technologies came together, right? We had the HTML, we
Yes.
had also yeah, all the scripting parts. Now, of course, in a more powerful backend using C sharp and .NET and so on. And then, of course, what happened at the end of, let's say, the 2000s towards 2010, suddenly there was this big buzz around jQuery and HTML5, and I got immediately on that because beforehand, I mean, JavaScript, it felt cool, but it was never, let's say, serious, right? But then it
Mhm.
suddenly, the let's say, differences between the browsers that began to let's say, evaporate, and also having jQuery as a foundation, suddenly also writing JavaScript felt more powerful. And we all know that since then a lot of has happened, and even the native tools, they became better and better. And I think today, if you would say you write just plain JavaScript, not even TypeScript, it feels so much more productive than 15, 20 years ago, because all the new language additions, etc., they made JavaScript a really, in my opinion, really great language, and that just fit my mindset really well. So that's a little bit of my journey. And I mean, I've been working now in the IT professionally since I think 2004. I mean, I got a job as a still a pupil before that, but that is after school when I started working in there, and haven't looked back. So it's been a wonderful 20 plus years now. And yeah, it always felt that this path was just paved for me really well from the beginning.
All right. Yeah, like your journey sounds very interesting. And one more thing, one more common thing I found between so many developer is the gaming. Because I have introduced so many developers, and most of them always mention that initially they started with the gaming, and then later they started writing the code for preparing some set of tasks. So yeah, we can say that gaming is also playing a vital role for producing the best developers of the society. So that's a good thing. And yeah, to be honest, like if we see something which is already running on a code, then it really inspires us to find out like how it is happening, whether we are playing game or we are watching any particular animation. So that always encourages that yes, if this is something can be doable through programming, so we should start learning it. So that's why like this is happening. And here, Flo, I want to mention one more thing, because you are known as a one of the best developer and Microsoft MVP. But another thing is that like you are widely known as an innovator in micro frontends. So let's start from very scratch. Like for those who are unfamiliar, could you please just describe the term what is micro frontend and why they are matter today? Like why it is so important to learn?
Yeah, so there are many definitions out there, and I think the community has so far agreed by the definition that also Luca Mesalira gave, which is that it represents a subdomain and so on. But I don't want to go now into this technical definition. What you
Mhm.
can usually regard as a microfront is if you take a web UI, so you go to some website and you take one piece out of what you see rendered on the screen, and you now say, well, what if this one piece is not, let's say, living in the same code base as all the other things, but in
Mhm.
its completely separate code base and can also be, of course, deployed and changed, etc., completely separately from the main UI. If you have this scenario, then welcome to microfrontends, and therefore also this microfrontend thing is not something new. Okay, we now are, let's say, doing new tooling and have the wording and terminology right. But if we go back, and that's where I come back to the journey that I've taken, and we start at the 2000s, where the first, I mean, even before that, but then the first ads appeared that were introduced by a new thing called an iframe. This kind of isolation and bringing something, that's a microfrontend, right? So the ad technology was developed by some team you don't know, you don't control, they don't own anything of your code base. So all you do is introduce an iframe, and suddenly this thing is here. Even today, this is still used. So, for instance, if you integrate some chatbot or I don't know, consent manager, what you
Mhm.
usually do that you introduce a script tag on your site, and what the script does, it loads something and it injects an iframe into your HTML, and so suddenly you have a completely isolated part of code running in your application. So that doesn't mean you have a microfrontend solution right now, but you're using a microfrontend.
Right.
And this is a special kind of a microfrontend, an external microfrontend. So usually what I deal mostly with is building up microfrontend solutions that embrace, let's say, internal microfrontends, where you have around this one project multiple teams, and they all contribute now parts of the UI into this one project. And then, of course, you don't need to use iframes. Actually, you want to avoid it as much as possible. But the thinking behind it is still the same: separate teams bringing together parts of the UI that flow into one, yeah, really cohesive UI, where you couldn't say, oh, this thing that looks like it's coming from somewhere else. It all looks like it's just belonging together.
Right. So, like here, I would say there are some kind of myths around this front end, and usually people believe that it is reducing the performance as well, and it is taking time to load the application. So, as an expert, as an MVP, what you think? Like, what are the common biggest misconception you have encountered about the micro front end, and does it really affect the performance, or what is the real scenario?
It can. I mean, I would also have that as one of the points on my list for the biggest misconceptions. I
Mhm,
mean, surely it is more complicated, and that, of course, introduces also more challenges for getting, let's say, the same performance or better performance.
mhm,
But looking at the bigger picture, and I mean, I've been in countless microphone projects, so sometimes just, consulting, sometimes from the get-go, so architecture of the platform up to, the maintenance parts of it. And what I can tell you is that in general, these things tend to outperform the monoliths. And in multiple metrics. So of course, naturally, that's where you mostly use them. Scalability regarding how you onboard teams or developers, how fast you can ship features. That, of course, should be given because otherwise, what are we talking about? But then even the runtime performance, you can have so many optimizations because what usually is like a so-called waterfall or a cascade of cache invalidation. So you rebuild your application, just a tiny bit changed, and now all the resources they get new hashes and everything changed essentially because at the root level there's one different identifier and it just needs to be given from the whole cascade. Now with microphones that can't happen. You ship now your code and that can now be regarded as immutable on whatever is now the cache side. Could be the user's browser if you use microphones in a single page application, but could also be some edge computing side. It all depends how you set up your microphones, but the performance can be much better because you're already from the beginning on in this modular world. So that is, of course, one misconception. The other is that teams need to be really big for microphones to make sense.
mhm,
Yes, there, of course, it shines in that regard, but there are exceptions to that rule. If you already know that you have certain parts in your code base that move faster or slower, putting them in a dedicated microphone and can make sense because first of all, the build time will be much reduced.
mhm,
And second, you get these caching benefits and everything that I was just talking about. So therefore, it can make sense. It's then always, of course, the usual trade-off between complexity and what you actually want to achieve with your solution. So if you say, oh, the build times are getting too high, getting into the complexity of microphones might make sense here because what are you doing otherwise, right? I mean, you need somewhat to get that down.
yeah,
Another misconception that I quite often hear is that, oh yeah, we introduced microphone and so the first thing we got is the header microphone or a footer microphone. And
mhm,
yes, it might make sense for your solution to have such a microphone, but I mean, I usually regard it as an anti-pattern, and the reason is quite simple. Now, if we think about the whole application, I mean, what usually then changes a lot is the header or the footer, right? I mean, footer we can argue about, but let's say the header. Pretty much every team that has, let's say, a real important feature is potentially present in the header via link or something else. So if there's some change now from these other teams, right, from where the subdomain is parked, they will always come to this other team and say, change this in your microphone and change that. So the ownership is not really clearly given here. And therefore, this puts a lot of pressure now on this one team. And actually, you wanted to have microphones to put back the autonomy to these teams. And suddenly, all these teams need to align and figure out who owns the header or the footer
yes,
and go to these teams, right? So, therefore, if this scenario is given, you have obviously a problem in the architecture. Still, it might make sense. But I always regard then the header as a somewhat composed microphone if you really want to have it as a microphone and it would rather draw still the information from other microphones implicitly and not, explicitly via code. And yeah, so the last one that I want to point out is that very often, I mean, I have to do with a lot of technology. So in the microphones, there are several things, and you already mentioned Piral in the introduction, but there are other technologies as well, even things that are, let's say, lower level than Piral, things like module federation, for instance. And even though module federation is good and certainly are suitable for carrying a microphone and solution, the first question is, would it make sense to just place it on this really low level component, or do you want to put something that is more high level maybe in front of you? But the
mhm,
second thing is just because you have model federation doesn't mean you have a microphone and solution, right? You still need to think about all these things. How are you, let's say, having the autonomy of the teams really guaranteed? So just having model federation doesn't mean you're doing microphones. It would be the same as saying, I use Docker, therefore I use microservices. That's
mhm,
by no means given, right? I mean, it's a technology and it can be, of course, very successfully be used for introducing microservices, but I mean, you can also do other things, and there are various other challenges with microservices that are certainly not covered by just Docker, right? And therefore, I mean, it can help, but it doesn't
Correct.
mean just because you use that you have the other thing. And the counter argument is also true. Just because you're not using Docker doesn't mean you're not doing microservices, right? And it's the same here. Therefore, I mean, model federation without now any, let's say, white or any kind of judgment here, but just regard it as a tool, and it can help you for creating a microphone solution, but it's certainly not the only thing, and there are more things that are necessary for a real microphone solution than just picking this one tool. So those are, let's say, the misconceptions I wanted to highlight here.
Okay, but here I would say like the way you have debunked all these myths and the misconception, I'm 100% sure that it is going to resonate with so many other listeners, especially those who are planning to incorporate these micro front end technology into their project. So it will help them to find out the actual cause, like why they are avoiding the micro front end, and it will really help them. So thanks for debunking all those myths around the micro front ends. Okay, so Flo, now like we will discuss a bit about one of your greatest contribution for the IT industry, that is Piral. So let's talk about Piral. So which is one of your open source mainframe project for building the micro front end itself. So what do you think? Like, why did you decided that it's the right time to develop this front end framework? And what gap did you see in the ecosystem that Piral was designed to fill up? Like, what was that scenario?
Yeah. So in order to understand why Piral came to life, we need to take a little bit the historical context into perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So I was already, let's say, developing something like Piral starting of 2016. I was working as a smart home solution, and this is where I got, let's say, introduced to microphonics. Of course, it wasn't really called like that back then, but we had to figure out a solution how to, let's say, bring autonomy to those people that are actually then developing more or less a full stack for devices. So you want to add into the smart home ecosystem of the vendor I was working for, you wanted to add another integration, let's say for Lightning using Philips Hue, for instance. What did you
Mm-hmm.
have to do? You had to create a device driver that works on the gateway of our vendor. You had then also to integrate that and have it in the UI displayed, right? And that, of course, the device driver is one thing, could be done in-house, no problem. But then someone else had to ship this monolithic UI and had to include that, which really doesn't make sense because if the device driver loads, I mean, only then we need it and otherwise not. So the question was, can we just achieve that, but nothing else than just the device driver, right? So loading this one thing and suddenly everything works like magic. And that also could bring this whole thing into one team, right? That a team that's only specialized in this scenario on Philips Hue devices or the integration of Philips Hue. Now, we developed something and it worked really nice. And I thought, great, so let's move on to the next project. And so this time it was a kind of a customer portal for a B2B service. So, huge company in Germany, a worldwide champion. They make lenses and so on. Anyway, and we hit it. First, it looked like, your standard project, whatever, nothing changes. But then they come up with requirements like we already have services. We have already a ticket service and a UI for that. We have already this software download service and a UI for that. And you're like, so you don't want us to reinvent these UIs? No,
Correct.
let's reuse as much as possible. Let's also reuse the services. And I was like, okay, maybe there's a pattern here. There was before in something the smart home scenario. Now we have here the same essentially. All we need is a shell where these things can live in, and
Mm-hmm.
then everything else is, let's say, naturally flowing in. So it makes sense. And of course, is what's then the second iteration. And when I joined Smarpiot, the company I'm now in, I said from the beginning, we can work together, it's all fine. But what I really want to do, because where I really see, let's say, a gap, and there wasn't much at this time. There was single spa, but it had its own problems, and there was nothing else. That we had open components, but that was mostly designed for server side, and we needed something that is fast, so much faster than single spa was. was really also driven by a technology, in this case React, but open for other technologies so that you get the fastest possible experience for React, but you can have anything else integrated. And it follows a loosely coupled mode. And that was really the crucial point because single spy was strongly coupled. You could break out of this, but it is not really officially documented. And the way that they, let's say, documented it was always in this one direction. So you had to build a lot of things around it. So in my opinion, loosely coupled is the way to go for any distributed system. Otherwise, you're just creating a hidden monolith.
Yeah.
And therefore, having this path, the loosely coupled path, as the standard path and let's say the easy path, that was for me really important because I mean, the other thing that also works, you can always try to add things to make a loosely coupled system a strongly coupled system. That always works, but it's, I mean, why do it? Because if you already have the better side easily accessible.
Right.
And so the idea came around to make this an open source framework. The problem, of course, and that was making it generic, right? Because when you start with this kind of thing, and as expressed, I already had it in a similar form in two projects before that. It's always very opinionated, right? And you use things in the project that are only they're making only sense for this project. So making that as, let's say, widely accessible as possible, plus of course as customizable as possible, that of course was a challenge. And I think didn't get it totally right in 2019 when it was released. But yeah, in the last years it really got stable. There are hardly any bugs, if any. I mean, I'm not sure of any that is at the moment
Okay.
known. I'm quite sure there are bugs out there, right? But at least they don't seem to bother users. And therefore, yeah, quite happy with the outcome because we really shipped, I think, a quite successful thing. If you want to create micro frontends from the get-go, this gives you the basis for pretty much everything that you need to have.
Okay. And let's say if someone wants to contribute to this open source project, so is it available on GitHub or you are
Yes, it's
providing?
on GitHub.
Okay,
Yes.
it's on
And
GitHub.
it's open, of course, for contributions. But I always would, of course, first encourage to check it out, to play
Right.
around with it, to follow the tutorials that we have. And if you like what you see, then always feel free to dive into the code base. We also have a Discord server. So if anything is unclear, you need some guidance, always just show up there. And we have a quite active community there. So yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. And another question, Flo, like I have regarding the serverless computing, because with the rise of serverless, edge computing, and Jamstack, where do you see the future of front-end architecture is heading towards? Because nowadays everyone is talking about advanced things like AI and serverless computing, edge computing. So what do you think? Like how the future is going to be for the for the front-end architecture?
Yeah, I think modularity is key. Of course, I'm in the microphone space, so I'm biased here, but I'm not saying with modularity is key that everyone will do microphones in the future. But what I see is, I mean, we have all these great technologies and new architecture patterns and everything,
Mhm.
and AI capabilities that, also create quite nice UIs or UI code in general. But the biggest problem is then how do you isolate it or break it down?
Right.
Because once you isolate the code and have it in smaller shippable modules, you can do a lot of things. Suddenly, I mean, you mentioned serverless. Suddenly, you
Yes.
can have a part of it rendering just on a single function. You don't need then the whole craft of the whole application, which might not even fit in memory of whatever serverless model you take there, or might have an increased startup time or whatever. I mean, it comes as overhead that you don't need. You can now put it on a serverless or an edge renderer and all these things. But that only is capable of being done when you have these smaller modules. Also, if you want now the AI to assist you or create a little feature, I
Mhm.
mean, having an AI creating a large application, I mean, it's always a miracle if that somewhat works. But the smaller the application gets, the more, let's say, successful the outcomes are of the AI. And that's not only a limitation by token size, it's also this of the solution space that's available. I mean, these things they are still, I mean, probabilistic, right? So that
Mhm.
it's a miracle that they anyway work that well. I mean, a couple of years ago, right, we believed that it will be never happening, and now suddenly is everyone is talking about it just to be, let's say, warped back to reality when things are not working as they should be. But if you make it small enough, and of course the prompts, yeah, let's say, engineered well enough, then suddenly you get out something that's really useful. So modularity and having smaller sizes definitely matter here. And for me, this really matters a lot because suddenly, yeah, the things become manageable and flexible in so many directions. In general, just to add one or two more sentences, I think we also need to distinguish between two things. This is for the web. One is the document platform, which is the classic HTML. I mentioned mid of the 90s, etc. So there are multi-page applications, raw performance, and the least size that is transferred over the network. These things matter a lot, and they will continue to improve in the future. I think we've seen really drastic performance improvements. The frameworks got a lot better. Also, static site generators got a lot better. Things like Astro that generate such nice code, really good code. So yeah, you get the lowest potential website loading times that you can imagine. And the other thing is the app platform, the thing that essentially since the Web 2.0 got more and more popular, where heavy JavaScript usage is de facto there. So this is where the single page applications shine, but not only, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think here, of course, we will also see more native capabilities. So they will reach, I mean, they're pretty much already there, but I think that they will reach really the level of capabilities and also performance-wise as we've seen native apps. And this will be also interesting. And that these are the two, let's say, factors on the web platform, independent now of, I don't know what React does or Angular does in the future. This is also where these frameworks then go and to fill these gaps. And so this is what we will definitely see, these two strings, let's say, pillars of the web evolving over time. And I think modularity therefore plays still a big role because very often you don't have, let's say, the exclusivity that you say, I only do for the app platform, I only do for the content or document platform. Sometimes there's always a mixture of both. You have sites that are more, let's say, on the app platform. You have other sub pages that deal
Yes.
more in the document or content heavy space. And therefore, having modularity there shines as well. You can just make the best out of each part.
Okay. So here, Flo, I want to ask one thing because there are plenty of things through which you have contributed for the IT industry, whether it's your advocacy activities as a MVP or through your books or the blogs that you publish, and obviously like your open source project as well. So who were the source of inspiration for you? Like if we talk about some of your colleagues, maybe the colleagues or maybe the family members, so who were those key people around you who helped you to achieve these goals?
Certainly, first thing to mention is my family. So my father, my wife, my mother, of course. So everyone around me always contributed. They have always been
Yes.
really supportive. But then, of course, there were some key peoples. Like when I started after school to be a professional, I have had a mentor there, an instructor who was really open-minded and yeah, just showed me the right things. Then, I mean, I decided to study physics, theoretical particle physics. And there also I got a lot of people that have been really helpful, mentoring me through the years. And then, of course, colleagues later on. I always had the pleasure to working with really supportive colleagues that were reading my articles and pointing out things that I could improve, but
Yes.
also always cheering. And that I think that level of support I would just wish everyone had because at the end we are not alone in this world and we can
Correct.
only, let's say, swim if someone also teaches us or supports us. How else would you like to swim from one side to the other if there's nothing to be found there and no one cheering for you along the way? So therefore, yeah, that was really fortunate.
Okay. Although like Flo, we have many things that we can discuss here because the amount of wealth you bring with you in this podcast is quite like there are plenty of things where we can have the discussion, but we are short on the time. So I just would like to ask one more thing regarding your hobbies because we all know that technically you are doing so much things. So what are those other things that keeps you inspired or active throughout your day?
I mean, I was doing a lot of sports. Since I have kids, the sports always get a little bit, let's say, deprioritized. But now I'm back a little bit. I enjoy running, I enjoy mountain biking, and I still like to do some skiing in the winter when I have the
Mhm.
time. And I think, let's say, just enjoying a little bit of sports. This is what I like to do the most. Otherwise, of course, like everyone, we heard gaming is always a pillar. It still is for me. I try at least to compete with the young kids. they're better than me, but yeah, I still try to give them a fight. And of course, movies and TV shows I like a lot. Still somewhat invested in the Star Wars universe. Let's see, maybe it gets better over time, but I didn't lose my hope yet. Let's see.
Okay. All right. So thank you so much, Flo, for joining in this podcast and for sharing so much information, especially for debunking all those myth which is around micro front end. I'm 100% sure like those who really want to adopt that technology, they are more comfortable now and they know like these are the myths and they can move ahead and take those things into their project. So thank you once again for sharing your expertise.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.